Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining this special version of the Clallam EDC Coffee Chat, Coffee with Colleen. Today, we have Paul Gottlieb with us, who was formerly the senior reporter of Peninsula Daily News, working for Sound Publishing, and he is going to talk to us about a variety of subjects, but I've been trying to get him on to do this. I thought it would be really interesting to hear his 40-year perspective of some of the most interesting topics that he wrote about during his career. And I think he was a consummate professional and a person kind of in the community, but also just writing his perspective on things. So this is meant to be kind of a historical view of interesting things that happened in our community, but then also he's going to talk about the voter's guide and a couple other topics. So with that, Paul, I'll let you go ahead and take it away. And again, if anybody has questions or comments that they want to ask, we'd like this to be interactive. So go ahead and raise your hand and we'll call on you. Or if you have questions you want to put in the chat, you can do that as well. So Paul, thanks so much for finally being willing to do this. And everybody will be nice to you. Take it away.
No, that's okay, Colleen. Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. Yes, it's been about 2.5 years since I retired, and you've been wanting to get me on your Zoom, which I try to watch every week. And thank you for inviting me. And I have somewhat of an ulterior motive because I'd like to talk about the voter guide that Sound Publishing is putting out. But I'll spend some time on me and a little bit on community journalism and the election, which is one of the most interesting elections that I've been witness to, not only nationally, of course, but locally as well. And I can talk a little bit about that. But first, a little bit about me. I'll try to make that as short as possible. So I grew up in New Jersey, although I traveled around a lot before then, but mostly grew up in New Jersey and started writing journalism when I was in high school. Some people may not be surprised. I was a columnist for my high school paper. And I I grew up during the Vietnam War. The big issues for me growing up were the Vietnam War. I'm 72, so that's why. The Vietnam War and civil rights. So that's what I wrote about for my high school paper as a columnist. And I was a big supporter of Dick Gregory, if anyone remembers the 70s. He ran against Nixon. But anyway, that was a really fun experience. And my two moments from high school that I remember was getting such a reaction from readers of my high school that they had a letter to the editor to the newspaper, the Laurentian Lawrence High School, same high school as John Stewart graduated from 10 years later. But they had a letter section, and I had so many reactions to my letters, to my columns, that they titled the letter section "Pot Shots at Paul." So that was sort of that was fun. I really, really loved that. I was a voracious reader then and read the New York Times at 10th grade. But anyway, I went to Rutgers, graduated from Rutgers with an English degree, worked for the college paper there, went to Northwestern, Medill School of Journalism, got a master's there, and started my career sort of late at age 29. I split my college to travel around and hitchhike across the country and work all sorts of jobs. My first major job was in Milton Freewater, Oregon, and it was a little unusual I guess, having grown up in New Jersey. Both my parents were born in New York. My father in New York City, my mother on Long Island. Being a frequent visitor to New York City as a child, grew up in various cities in New Jersey, Trenton mostly, and all of my experience has been in small newspapers. and started my career at Milton Freewater across the border from Walla Walla in Oregon, and at a weekly there. That was in 1980, and worked there for several years, gravitated over from there to Astoria, to the San Juan Islands, mostly worked in the San Juan Islands and at the Peninsula Daily News, but worked in the San Juan Islands for 11 years at both the Sounder and the Journal of the San Juans in Friday Harbor, and worked in Enumclaw for a year, worked in Burien, worked in Gig Harbor, worked in Burien before the Seattle Times shut down the Highline Times. And interestingly, when I was working at the Journal, Sound Publishing sort of was growing back then, and they bought the Journal, they bought the Sounder. They basically they bought the Courier Herald and Enumclaw. They basically have bought all the papers that I worked for, and in many ways kept them alive. And so anyway, I came here in 1998. I was trying to think about how things were different in 1998 from today. Cell phones really came on big when I came to the Daily News. That's how long ago that was. One of the candidates for legislature that I've covered, I was thinking the other day, he was 6 years old when I came here, and now he's running for the state legislature. That's a sort of mind-numbing, but anyway, stories that I've written, I can think of a story that I wrote in high school that I was very proud of, one of my columns. When I was in high school, girls could not wear pants. They had to wear dresses. And I have several Facebook friends from high school that I got in touch with to ask them if they remember when they could finally wear pants. But a highlight of my time at the Laurentian was writing a column advocating for girls to wear pants. I was very proud of that. And of course, back then, mini skirts were big, and I was a great fan of mini skirts, but it just seemed like the right thing to do. That girls should be allowed to wear pants. So I wrote a column about that, and I was proud of that. As far as stories here that I've written over the last 28 years, I would have to say that stories that I wrote about the 8th Street bridges. As a reporter, you want a standard, the standard feeling that I think is among many reporters is if you're going to write stories, you want to make a difference. And I think that the story that I wrote that probably made the most difference while I was here was covering the 8th Street bridges, and particularly the change from the 4.5-foot fence over those two 100-foot tall spans to have fences that protected people from getting the idea that they wanted to die by suicide. Tragic situation. That fence was so short that when you walked across those bridges, when I did, I would back away from it because it just was plain scary. And they built those bridges with short fences without any kind of protection because it was less expensive. And people just kept dying from jumping off those bridges. I saw a video of it when they had cameras there, and it was just horrible. I'll never forget that. But the standard thought was that it wouldn't matter if it wouldn't matter if there was a fence there, that people would still find a way to jump off, that people would still find a way to die by suicide. And so I did some research, very quickly found a Harvard study that showed that if people try to jump off die by suicide by jumping off a bridge, that they're going to try to do it again. No, they don't. The standard feeling is, and we had an author come here after they did put up those barriers, who had written a book about it, who had tried jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge and dying by suicide, and he failed. And commonly, a very common feeling is that he had the feeling, what am I doing? When he jumped off the bridge and later survived, he recalls thinking, what am I doing? I can't do this. He never did it again. He never tried again. And he became an advocate for mental health and for having barriers on bridges. And so I found that people don't try again to die by suicide if they survive jumping. And so I wrote about this, and eventually I like to think that that had a hand in getting the city to put up new barriers. And of course, Sherry Kidd who was mayor and city council member. One of her great lasting legacies on the council is the forces, the community feelings, the force that she marshaled to get people to donate to that. I believe a member of the Crow family donated a large amount of money for that, thankfully. And those barriers were built, and no one has died by suicide from jumping off those bridges since then. I live between the bridges, so unfortunately, being a reporter, and also working a lot from home, I covered some of those incidents where people died by suicide. And again, an image you don't want to have locked in your brain, but which unfortunately you do, like many images as a reporter, that you can't get out of your head, but there they are. And I was here, and I had to cover a lot of those incidents, and there are still memorials at the bottom of there's a memorial at the bottom of Valley Creek Ridge still from the last person who jumped who was a 15-year-old girl. So anyway, so yeah, I'm sure that there are other stories too. It's funny living in a small town. I was thinking of this yesterday. You naturally, if you're a social person, I'm somewhat of a social person, you have friends, but being a reporter, of course, you can't cover your friends. And I've had to pass up one really big story because I'm not going to be really specific here, but there was a story involving corruption, and it was sort of a dream way to get into it, because I had someone come up to me to say, can you protect me as a source if I tell you something that I think needs to be written about? So this person did, and I pursued it. It turned out that the person that they were talking about was involved with a friend of mine, and I couldn't cover the story. And it was one of the biggest stories that I would have covered. But anyway, um, it's hard. It's hard living in a community for a reporter sometimes, and having friends, because you never know when you may have to cover them, and then you can't cover them because most journalists I know love their jobs, and it's a real contribution to the community to be a reporter, to inform people about what's happening around them and about their lives, the good and the bad.
So
And
Paul, did you pass the story on to another reporter?
yes, I did. I
Okay.
did. I did. I had to.
Yeah.
And I couldn't. It was a great story. And to have someone come up to you and say, can you protect me? Of course I can. I love that. And that's one of the great things about being a reporter, that you can, but of course you have your credibility, and you have to be able to do that.
So John asked, what's the rule about friends in reporting?
Well, you can't really, well, uh, if you have a friend who's involved in a political race, you can't talk to them about the race. And that's happened to me. You can't talk to them about what's going on. Uh, you have to, in a lot of ways, divorce yourself from them. You have to be really, really careful. And if you're involved with someone romantically, then you've got to tell your boss. I mean, you always have to be communicating with your editor, always. Um, Most editors will ask you who your source is, but it will stay between you and the editor. Um, Most editors like to know who you're talking about, or who you're talking to. But but of course, most people know that is a right that is protected by the courts, and there are reporters who gladly go to jail. You know, take me away if it's to protect a source. I would gladly have gone to jail. Um,
The source has to say this is off the record before they start telling you something, right?
yes, oh yes, they do. They do. People, if you're a really good reporter, then you'll get people to talk. And you want to identify yourself as a reporter when you do talk to people for a story. I have a general rule that and I was also thinking about this, that if I'm just talking to someone and they tell me something that's interesting, I'll usually go back to them and talk to them about, I want to write about this, and then we'll set the ground rules. Is this going to be an unnamed source? Is it going to be on background, which is basically you you say it, but you don't say where it came from. Off the record is just off the record, period. You don't use it. I've gone back, someone has said, a lot of times you can say, someone will say, okay, go off the record, and then they'll tell you something, and then you'll go back and you'll say, well, is there any real reason for this to be off the record? And you might try to convince them that it might be worth going on the record under whatever terms that you might decide on. Maybe it's if it's someone from maybe a legislative source, or a close family member, or uh, uh, someone close to the issue, however you want to phrase it. Usually, these days, newspapers will, uh, if they use an unnamed source, they'll state the reason why, because they weren't authorized to speak on the issue, or because it hasn't been divulged publicly, or for some reason. People usually like to know why someone doesn't want to be quoted.
And it seems as though, maybe I'm wrong, but the trend in the national news is you read that more and more nowadays.
You mean having the explanation?
Well, saying a source that and not identifying the source.
Yes, yes. Well, very, very famously, most of the Watergate stories that uh, that were written were unnamed sources. Hundreds of stories, unnamed sources, one after the other. Um, the PDN had a rule: no unnamed sources. So they believe, and there's an argument to be made for that people don't trust it. They don't trust it if you have an unnamed source. Who is that really? And then especially if it's something scurrilous or damaging to somebody, or casts a bad light, then that's sort of understandable. If you're going to make a charge, then uh, it can be argued that you should have the courage to say who you are. On the other hand, in this political climate these days, um, there are a lot of people who are rightly afraid of saying something, especially on the national stage, if it's a national candidate. They're often afraid because they get trolled, they get threatened, um, their lives are rent apart by people with nefarious motives, just because someone has the courage to speak out, to speak their mind, which is really sad in America. But so yeah, so that's been my sort of what I've dealt with in terms of, wanting to have friends, but being a reporter, you have to really sort of be careful. So reporters are, they're insular, and a lot of their closest friends are reporters. That's how it's been for me living here. My closest friends have been reporters.
Yeah. So of the local politicians that you've covered, who are some of the most interesting from your perspective over the years?
Oh my goodness. Patrick Downey was really interesting. He was amazing. He really loved the
City
community.
council member in Port Angeles.
Yes, council member and mayor, and famously changed his vote. And this when the whole fluoride issue was just tearing the community apart, absolutely tearing it apart. People showing up and cursing at the podium in their comments, and showing up with signs, and people calling each other names, and it just absolutely tore the community apart. And Patrick was for fluoridation, but he realized that there was a larger, greater good in bringing peace to the community. I know that a lot of people still believe that water should be fluoridated here, but he changed his vote to bring that issue to rest, and that really showed his love for the community. He was an amazing person. Um, Higher purpose. He was a higher purpose kind of guy. Um, Boy, it's hard to say. I can't, I've covered mostly the city council. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it really is, and I speak from experience on this, it very often is not people don't understand that it is a mostly volunteer role, and you can receive incredible harsh attacks from the public that may not understand the issues. I mean, sometimes it's deserved, sure, but oftentimes I think it's not. And to the degree that
oh
public
yes.
get creamed,
Yes, well,
there can be a lot of vitriol. Yeah.
you think a big city might be bad, but you can be anonymous, if you're a public official, you can be anonymous in a big city when you walk in a grocery store. Here, you're always on. When you walk out your door, you're always on. You're always being examined, being questioned, being walked up to, being talked to, uh, whether or not you're with your family. Um, and yeah, it is really, really, really difficult. And no, I know city council members, they get what, 600 some odd dollars a month. Um, if you're lucky and serve on a board here, I think the hospital district and PUD, you get insurance. Um, if you're lucky. I think PUD, you get 12,000 a year, maybe 13,000 a year. And you get a stipend, but that's nothing. Um, that's an incredibly difficult technical job. Excuse me. And school board, my goodness. School board meetings are covering all kinds of meetings, PUD, city council, county commissioner, covering court hearings, covering school board meetings. They are the longest meetings because they always have presentations and they talk things out. And the school board here does not get anything. It's a tradition on the school board here, and I think in Squim as well, and maybe also Quileute. They don't, they refuse to take anything. So that, I mean, talk about public service. And the importance of a school board job. Um, you know, you're shepherding children through the most important years of their lives, They leave home and school just started and away they go, and you don't see them until dinner. And what a tremendous responsibility. And the people who serve on school boards don't take anything. And their meetings are the longest of anyone because you have your presentations by teachers and you have your budget meetings and everything. But I just admire anybody who would run for public office. It is just such an incredible responsibility. But on that note, if you talk about reporters, uh, now me, um, I essentially worked for private businesses. Newspapers are private businesses. It's the only business, though, protected by the Constitution. Um, Free press, First Amendment. It's the only business. It's a high honor. But at the same time, it is a business. But reporters are quasi public officials in their own way. They're very, very much in the public eye. And so when I went out my door, I would often run into people who would want to talk to me about what was going on at the newspaper and stories that I would write. I would always like the idea when someone would come up and say, I have a story for you, especially when they say, can you protect me if I tell you something? Which I love to say yes to. But um, but yeah, being a reporter is very much in the public eye, and it's it's a huge responsibility. So you're really in two worlds. Uh, and for 7 years of the paper, I was a commentary editor from 2000 to 2007. And after that, I still helped with letters to the editor. Anyone can ask me about letters to the editor. I gave presentations on that, but that was a big honor to do letters. But that was very much in the public eye too. And when I was commentary editor, I was even more in the public eye than a reporter because I wrote columns and my photo was in the paper. Just the other day, I was at Safeway getting my COVID and my flu shots. And a guy said, I was waiting to get the shots, and a guy said, "Oh, yeah, I know you. I saw your picture in the paper." That was in 2007, almost 20 years ago was the last time my photo was in the paper for a column. And yet he remembered, and um, I still have letter writers ask me, talk to me about letters. Uh, Letter writers who waited every single, they had a 30-day rule on letters, and they would wait until the 30 days was up, and then they would write another letter to the editor. That's how much a letter to the editor, that's how much they treasured uh, being able to get their opinions out. And we treasured them to do that, to use us to do that, to have that platform for the public. And that's really what a newspaper does. And that's what letters are for. I wish we got more of them now. I wish the PDN got more of them. But that's just the way things are. But there were letter writers would wait 30 days. I talked to someone yesterday and he said, yep. He said, I have two letters ready. And I said, two? It's only 30 days for the PDN. He goes, well, I sent it to the Squim Gazette too. I sent a letter to the Squim Gazette too, because I have a 30-day rule. So people, I guess that's just, don't mean to go all over the place, but people really treasure their local paper. And thank goodness we still have a local paper. Um, you know, it's certainly to the sadness of people involved in the paper and readers. It's gotten smaller. That's just the way things are for papers right now. It's gotten smaller, and we have one less day of publication, at least in print. And it's sad, but it's still going strong. And uh, anyway, and if anyone has a question about anything that I've been talking about, if you want
John
to,
just very quickly asked if you ever wrote about Mayor Edward Bell of Union, New Jersey.
no,
Okay.
no, I only wrote in New Jersey. I only wrote for the Laurentian, my Lawrence High School paper, and the Targum at Rutgers. So I covered some big stories of the Targum, but that was a daily paper, 5-day daily, Rutgers Targum. I don't know why they call it Targum, but that was fun. No, No, I didn't.
And it looks like Mitch has a question. Mitch?
Yeah, hi, Paul. You
I
were in
meant,
journalism pre-internet and post-internet. How
yes.
did that impact your reporting?
Well, yes, I was. Funny story about that. When I was I went to Medill School of Journalism at Northwestern, and I graduated in 1979. It was the last year that they used electric typewriters. I had a selectric, they had a whole dozens of selectric typewriters that we used, a little ball. That was the last year they used them. And my first job was I had used floppy disks. But then my next job was still cut and paste. Um, when we would write stories now, thank goodness for computers, I have to tell you. When we used to write stories, cut and paste, and uh, someone told me yesterday, yeah, that's how they got cut and paste on the computer. When I used to cut and paste, I really did cut and paste. I would type out on a double space, type out stories on an 8 by 11 paper. And then as I would edit the story, I would want to move a paragraph. So I would cut it and I would tape it to the bottom of the page, and I would just basically tape. So you might have 10 pages of a story that were taped together, all different tape, and you have your little editing marks. There are certain editing marks you use to edit, and that's what you did. But the computer has made things better and worse, I guess. So much better. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how reporters did it, looking up information. I just love how accessible information is. It just is right at your fingertips. It's incredible. My father called it intoxicating. Uh, he was a lawyer. He loved the internet. It's just incredible what you have access to. That said, and of course, this touches on our culture today. You have to be careful about what you see and what you read. I saw a fake website once that was an ABC News fake website it was not really ABC News, but it was fake. It's sort of like getting fished on I think a big phishing scam right now is USPS. You get a USPS notice, your package is waiting. Things you have to be careful about. You get something with a logo that you recognize from a business that isn't really from a business. So you have to be careful when you research. Um, it's been an incredible help in terms of access to information, but you have to be careful. I look for .gov sites. I'll look for mainstream media sites. Um, you look for .org sites. You have to be careful about what you use for sources, just like anybody who does research, and just like anybody who is interested in a topic. Um, I wish people were more careful about what they took to be fact and really isn't. So, but anyway, that's the culture we're in. You just have to be really careful. Yes.
Laurel's asked a question. What's your view concerning the future of small local newspapers? Optimistic or pessimistic? How do you see them evolving? This is fun
Well,
interviewing you instead of the other way around.
oh yeah, I know you love it. Yeah, that's
I
okay.
used to say to you, if I don't have a complete sentence, can you please change it so it's grammatically correct? Because I catch so much hell from my mom if she reads something as a former English teacher and I have not done it correctly.
No, you can't really.
Yeah, I
Um,
know.
I'll get to your question in a minute, Laurel, but interestingly, uh, the story I heard about Mayor Richard Daley from Chicago, famously cantankerous, may have helped John F. Kennedy win the election in a corrupt manner. Who knows? There are stories about that. But Mayor Richard Daley, he had definitely a potty mouth, and he would just spew things. And when reporters quoted him, they would always clean up his language and clean up his grammar. But no, I think I probably said no, I can't, because
Yeah.
now in today's world, if I do an interview, I try to record it so that quotes are sacrosanct. You can't change quotes around. Anything with quote marks around it. Actually, I encountered that in my voter guide. I had a candidate who quoted something and he had quotes around it. And then I looked up the quote and it was on it was on in a newspaper. And I looked it up and it wasn't quoted exactly like he said it was. And it gave a little bit of different meaning to it. So that would be inaccurate and unfair to his opponent if I had put that in the voter guide. So I had to call him and say, look, this isn't how the quote is. Can we work on this? We looked up the quote, we worked on it, we got it right, but you can't change quotes, especially when you record things. So unfortunately, yes, but it makes you more real, right? You're human. It makes you more of a human and more endearing. Just people like you more that way. If you're not perfect. So I couldn't do that. But anyway, the state of local journalism. Yeah. Well, I have to say, I have to use the caveat that in my years in journalism, the highest I got on the rungs of a newspaper was to be an editor. I was a news editor in the San Juans, and I was a commentary editor here, but I was never in management. So, you know, you can have, you can read about the business side. You can have feelings about it. As a reporter, you know more than most people about newspapers, obviously, but you don't really know the inner workings of what goes on behind certain doors in the newspaper because it's not your job. It's not part of what you do. So, you know, I can't speak specifically to really specifically to that. I know that um, when I was in graduate school, it was, you know, reporting jobs. Here I was in a fine school in Chicago, and the ad people, they had a board with how much you'd make, and they had an advertising program at Medill, and they had a news program at Medill, and the advertising people were always going to be making more than we were going to make, and we knew that. When I would look for jobs on the East Coast during my career, um, jobs were getting, reporters were getting nothing. Reporters have not ever made a lot of money. They do it largely for the love of the craft. But at any rate, that said, newspapers have done well in the past. I think that they were used to high profit margins when they were the only platform for advertising, the only platform for classifieds. Uh, they're still the only platform basically for legals, which is good. But you know, they are, as I said before, they are businesses. They have to make money. They make money on advertising and they make money on subscriptions. And so advertising revenue has shrunk. I mean, look where look at the classified section. Businesses have more options. Newspapers have to sell themselves better. They are businesses. They're selling a product just like everybody with a business, and they have to, and they have to sell themselves in new ways, with new platforms, especially with the internet. Obviously, people getting their news from the internet, people pigeonholing their interests, and it's unfortunate, but not being willing to go to uh, uh, platforms that don't advocate a certain position. That's sad that people, I guess it's their inclination to be in the choir, to get news from their own choir, but there's more platforms for businesses to sell their advertising on the internet, obviously. Um, so uh, I think that local journalism, they have to keep doing what they can do, keep providing a platform for local people, and keep writing about the community, give people what they need still. And I think that and sell themselves in new ways and better ways. Obviously, the smallest newspaper now has an internet presence and is online. The successful newspapers, unfortunately, the successful newspaper, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, uh, the New York Times has a huge uh, internet presence. They're national newspapers, though. Um, I'm constantly getting alerts on New York Times alerts, and it really has drawn me in. It really draws me in. I always look at them. Um, and uh, it's going to take a strong internet presence, most likely. And the way the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal have made the internet work is because they offer more on the internet than they do in print. Um, you'll go on the internet, you'll go on a story on the internet, and you'll see you'll see a bunch of stories related to that topic. If you go on and you read about the election, the presidential election, they'll have related stories there for you to read. So it's going to take a strong internet presence and the drive to keep doing what they do well, which is connecting to the local community and being involved in the community and helping it thrive. Um, with I know that some journalists don't like the idea of using these terms, but let them thrive with good news and bad, because you have to tell people the truth. You have to tell them what's really going on in the community, even when it hurts. That's life.
Yeah.
And you have to reflect life. But you also have to build up the community. You have to show what's good about it and have the good news stories too.
Yep. So Stephen Paleo has a question. How do you perceive the evolution of bias in news reporting over your career? And what factors do you believe have most significantly influenced the current state of bias in today's newspaper?
Well, I disagree with the premise in that question.
Well, certainly
I
we've
think
become polarized.
we've become polarized. Yes, I think there are there are lots of, a newsroom. There are lots of fail-safes in a newsroom. A reporter doesn't write a story, and it just goes in as it is. It goes through an editor. It often goes through two editors. It goes through a proofreader. It might go through more than two editors. And if there's any kind of question, then it'll go through somebody else. Maybe the publisher will look at it. A lot of newspapers, the publisher is separated because he deals with the business side of it. But in any case, I'm not sure what you mean by bias. When I did stories, if I did a story with a contentious issue, I would be sure to count the paragraphs that I have in there devoted to explaining each issue, because you don't want to show any kind of bias. Um, I, so, and it doesn't really work. It would be counterproductive, and a newspaper would lose money if they just showed bias toward one view, because then they would lose the other half of the argument. You want to have stories that present both sides. Now, if you say bias in terms of the editorial page versus the news coverage, yes, newspapers do have opinions. Some newspapers are moving away from editorials. The New York Times has moved away from writing editorials. When I was at the PDN, now the commentary page would be reserved for opinions, letters to the editor, but we would always, and it was really difficult sometimes, we would always, on certain days when we had Cal Thomas, we would have, I don't know, maybe just comparatively, maybe Charles Blow or Nicholas Kristof or somebody. We would always try to balance each day. If we had a liberal, we would have a conservative. And John Brewer didn't like having editorials, and I think maybe a lot of editors are moving that newspapers are moving in that direction. I don't know why the New York Times doesn't have editorials now, but his view would be people don't want to be told what to think, and no, they don't. And witness what you're saying, I can understand why some people believe that some newspapers are biased. They might be, I'm not sure biased is the right word. They might express an opinion. Bias is a little bit of a loaded word I don't really like to use because that connotes something that's an unreasonable sort of feeling and maybe an unjust feeling towards somebody. They might have opinions and they might show opinions on the editorial page, but in the news, no, that would be counterproductive to show bias. But I'm sorry that you feel that way.
It's inherently though a challenge. Yesterday I was at the PABA meeting and there were 4 different initiatives
I was
presented.
there, yes.
And and then there was an article in the paper today describing the 4 initiatives. And it's so difficult to show the pros and cons of each within a short, space. As I read the article, I thought, boy, that would be so hard to not try to unintentionally influence the reader that you should vote yes for this one should be no, that kind of thing, to give a good recap. That one in particular, I know would have been really challenging not to
Yes.
any preference.
And you talk about interesting you say that. I was at the same meeting, and the person who was for repealing the Climate Commitment Act used a figure on how much implementing the act cost at the gas pump, what it added to gas. So I was curious about that because I thought I might talk about it today. So I went on the internet and Googled the question, how much does the Climate Commitment Act cost in increasing gas prices? Basically, that was essentially the question. And I got 2 different answers. One was the answer from the Builders Association that was given. The other was the answer from Ecology, and they varied. One was 54 cents, the other was 4 cents. Who do you believe? I don't know. I don't know. That's the challenge that even reporters face, much less the public. I don't envy the public when you're trying to make a decision. And were there any other questions? I just wanted to talk a little bit about the election. Did you want me to?
Yes. So I just wanted to, Aaron Kennedy, who's the publisher of the PDN, said, don't forget that the PDN has the largest website presence on the Olympic Peninsula, 1.4 to 1.8 million views per month. And bias does not have a place in the PDN newsroom. We provide information to the reader so they can make an informed decision.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense to have bias. It just doesn't, because why would you want to lose part of your audience? You want to present a full view for people on both sides of the issue.
But that's hard when you have a limited space.
It is. That's why you devote space, and you can do certain mechanical things that will ensure it. And plus you will have guardrails like good editors, good publishers, a newspaper that's devoted to presenting both sides and not being biased, And but anyway, on the election, as long as I talked about the Climate Commitment Act, I'm really excited about this election. So we're doing a voter guide. We're doing it a little bit differently as a reflection of the way things are. The voter guide is for the first time and I've been doing voter guides for probably 20 years at the paper, off your elections and on your, and general elections, and they're accepting advertising. So and I want to just say that it's informational. There are no editorials. There are no opinion columns in this. The only opinions in that are those expressed by the candidates. We have candidates from both sides of every race. We have Clallam County Commissioner, Clallam PUD, Jefferson Commissioner. We have the 3 legislative races. We have the Senate, U.S. Senate, Congress. We have Attorney General, Insurance Commissioner. You know, I bought a house, was able to buy a house 6 years ago when I retired. I bought a house and I was able to pay it off when I retired. But anyway, my insurance went up incredibly this year. I don't know if whether any of you, 30 to 50% insurance, my home insurance went up. And so I was curious about this. And so the insurance commissioner is up for election. So I thought, what does that person do? He or she regulates insurance rates. You know, I didn't know that. So anyway, the insurance commissioner is in the voter guide. Like I said, Attorney General, Congress, Governor. So it's a really exciting. Oh, and DNR commissioner, which I think recently now it's going to be Upper Grove and Butler. It looks like that race did not change. There's a 51 vote margin. So Upper Grove, the King County City Council member against Butler, the former Congresswoman. So it looks like those two will be going at it for DNR, which is an incredibly important race. And like many of them this year, they are all just open races abound in terms of incumbents not running or recently appointed people running to gain the seat electorally. And DNR commissioner is an open race and of incredible importance to Clallam and Jefferson counties because we have more trust land, forest trust land here than any region in the state, any counties in the state. Those revenues are of incredible importance, especially to Quileute District and to Port Angeles, which has had to alter its budget because of the sale of the transfer, the proposed transfer. It was just proposed transfer of the Elwha watershed property, 3,000 acres on that, and that had an impact on the budget. That would have had a huge impact on the Port Angeles School District budget, and which was mentioned in a school board meeting. And so that race is really, really interesting for several reasons. You know, Upper Grove is a King County City Council member, and he was endorsed by the Clallam County Democratic Party, who did not endorse Kevin VandeWeghe, who was also running, a 20-year legislator, who did not advance because they liked Upper Grove's views on legacy forests, which are he wants to preserve legacy forests. Old growth forests generally are preserved here, but he wants to have more an eye toward preserving legacy forests, which are generally around 80 years old. They're mature trees, but they're 80 years old. Preserve them for public use and also climate change reduction. So that's a really interesting race. 2 brand new candidates as in the legislative districts, Birnbaum and our very own Matthew Roberson, prosecutor's office. Adam Birnbaum is also a Port Angeles resident. That's a new race because Mike Chapman is running for Senate, where Kevin VandeWeghe has left his seat. So that's a new race, running against Marcia Kelban, who is on. Hi, Marcia. There's Randy Johnson has an opponent, a well-known opponent, Kate Dexter, for county commissioner. So there are a lot of interesting races and of great consequence. So anyway, our voter guide is going to be coming out. The PDN voter guide is going to be coming out the Saturday before ballots go out, and the election, believe it or not, really begins in 42 days. 42 days, ballots will be mailed out to voters. And as we all know, the first presidential debate is next Tuesday. And it's an exciting time. So I hope a lot of you do what I do and I write it. Get out your voter guide. It'll be in the paper. It'll be in the PDN and the Gazette and the forum. Get out your voter guide and put it on your kitchen table like I do and look at the candidates and mark your ballots. I put together the questions by attending many, many forums, especially shout out to the PABA. What an organization to bring forum after forum here for the benefit of the public. The Port Angeles Business Association. So I went to many forums, PABA forums, and Rotary Forum, and talked to people in the know on the issues that will be discussed that are fleshed out in the voter guide. Housing was a huge issue. The Climate Commitment Act was the issue that really created differences in the candidates. That was the real red line between Republican and Democrat, Republicans and Democrats. Yeah, I was amazed too by the number of candidates who had family members who'd gone through addiction issues, and I was really a little bit taken aback by that, and just it was sort of, they were very heartfelt, and it really makes you realize the issues that we have to tackle, and that the people who are going to be elected have to tackle. And so I urge you really to become informed about them and make wise choices that are good for you and your families and everything. So
one thing I'd like to say is that I think it was an incredibly good decision for the higher good, as you talk about, and I know this isn't the reason why PDN did it, but to eliminate the comments on the online version of articles. That there was consistently so much vitriol from the same people that would just make really comments all the time. And that just made, I seriously thought about not running again, because, you know, there were comments that weren't educated or thought out and didn't understand, and, you know, but just would say such damning, horrible things.
yes.
You know, and it just means that people don't want to give their time and do the selfless public service that is often required of elected officials.
Yeah, you know, in the public sphere, newspaper, public officials, whether you get up at a city council meeting and want to say something, you want to add talking to your friends, talking to your family, you want to add to the public sphere, especially for a newspaper or in public as a public official. You want to add to the conversation. You don't want to subtract, and that kind of thing subtracts. So I totally agree.
So, and Aaron wrote, the upcoming Olympic Peninsula Voter Guide will be the most comprehensive and informative voter guide for local elections. Very grateful for Paul for coming out of retirement to put this together for us.
I get something out of it. I love it. So yeah. I really do. Yeah. One of the great things about retirement is I can watch the news all day or have it on while I'm in my kitchen working. So yeah, I love it.
Good. Good. Well, hey, thanks so much. It's been fabulous talking to you, and
thank you.
Appreciate the many decades of service you provided to this community, telling the story locally of what was happening. So, and I know there's a new generation of really committed folks that are doing a great job coming up behind you with strong leadership. So
thank goodness. And yes, some of them are at the PDN right now as we speak, I'm sure, working. I'm really excited for the staff they have down there.
Great. All right. Well, thanks everyone, and enjoy your day. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Colleen. Thank you very much.
See, that wasn't so bad.
No, not at all. Time flew.
Yeah, yeah.
Thanks, Colleen.